It was just another ordinary morning in the small town of Elmsford, where most people knew each other by name, and life felt comfortably predictable. The sun was already shining bright, warming the streets and casting long shadows over the rows of neat, pastel-colored homes. In the bustling heart of the town, the school bell rang, signaling the beginning of another day for students at Elmsford High School. Among the crowd of teenagers, one stood out: Devin Harris. He wasn't the most popular, nor the quietest. He was somewhere in between. A 17-year-old senior, he had always tried to keep his head down and his grades up. A kid who'd never shied away from doing the right thing, but had no desire to attract unwanted attention. His life was simple: wake up early, hit the gym before school, study, hang with his close-knit group of friends, and occasionally help his mom with chores around the house. That morning, like every other day, Devin slipped into his sneakers and grabbed a quick breakfast, his mom bustling around the kitchen, already preparing dinner. They had a rhythm to their mornings, an unspoken understanding that the day would go on like all the others. As Devin walked down the familiar path to school, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. The air felt heavier, as if it was thick with the anticipation of an event yet to unfold. He shrugged off the odd sensation. After all, high school was full of ups and downs, but nothing had ever seemed particularly out of place in Elmsford. He entered the school grounds and made his way through the hallways, greeting the few friends he passed. There was Marcus, the star athlete, who Devin knew was gearing up for his big game that weekend. Then there was Natalie, his classmate from English, always carrying a book in one hand and a notebook in the other. Today, she looked a bit more preoccupied than usual, her brow furrowed as she walked briskly toward the classrooms. But it wasn't until he stepped into his first class, history with Mr. Jensen, that things started to feel truly off. The classroom was abuzz with the usual chatter, but something was different. Devin caught snippets of conversations, hushed whispers that were quickly drowned out by laughter and clinking desks. And then, just before the bell rang, a new student entered the room. Devin didn't recognize him immediately. The kid, about the same age as Devin, walked in wearing a black hoodie, his eyes scanning the room nervously. Devin's mind immediately registered his features. He was African American, new to the town. His name, as Devin would later learn, was Jamal Thompson. There was something about the way Jamal moved, though. He wasn't just another transfer student. He had an edge, a quiet confidence, as if he was already aware that life here might not be as welcoming as it seemed. But Devin didn't think much more of it. New students came and went, and it wasn't his job to worry about their struggles. Class went on as usual. Mr. Jensen, a middle-aged man with a balding head and thick glasses, droned on about the civil rights movement. Devin half listened, doodling in his notebook, trying to make sense of the complex material. But his attention was split. Every so often, he found his gaze drifting toward Jamal, who seemed completely disengaged. The way he looked at the teacher, the other students, and then back at his desk, it wasn't paranoia, but a palpable tension in his posture. Devin could feel it in the air. There was something brewing. The tension didn't end there. As the bell rang, signaling the end of class, Devin grabbed his books and stood up. He was planning to meet Marcus and Natalie in the courtyard, but before he could step out, Jamal was stopped by two other students, Corey and Brad, two members of the popular crowd who had never shown an ounce of interest in anyone outside their circle. Devin didn't hear the beginning of the exchange, but it didn't take much to figure out what was happening. Jamal's face tightened, and Corey's loud voice echoed across the hallway. "What, you think you can just come in here and take our spot?" Corey sneered. Brad laughed, a low, dismissive sound. Devin froze. He knew the tension wasn't just about seating arrangements, but the invisible, yet ever-present undercurrent of racism that ran through parts of the school. It wasn't overt, but Devin had seen enough in his time here to know that the lines were drawn. Jamal, being new and different, was suddenly caught in the crossfire. Devin wanted to step in, to say something, to end the confrontation before it went any further, but something held him back. He didn't know if it was fear of making the situation worse or just the inertia of the moment. It wasn't his fight after all, or at least that's what he told himself. But as the confrontation escalated, Jamal's voice cut through the tension. "I don't know who you think you're talking to, but you're wrong." His words were measured, but they hit harder than any shout could. There was something in his tone that made Devin pause, something that spoke of years of silent resilience. Corey didn't back down, though. His smirk grew, and he leaned in closer to Jamal, his words laced with venom. "You better watch where you're standing. 'Cause around here, we don't like your kind." That was the moment it clicked for Devin. Jamal wasn't just another kid from a different town. He wasn't just a transfer student trying to find his place. Jamal was a target of something much deeper than a few insults and taunts. The subtle and ugly side of racism was rearing its head, and it was up to someone to challenge it. Devin felt the weight of the moment settle in his chest. He had a choice to make. Would he stay silent, as he had always done, or would he step up, risk everything, and make the decision to fight back? As the bell rang, signaling the start of the next class, Devin stood at the crossroads of something much bigger than himself. The ordinary day had shifted. The world he thought he knew had just changed. And somehow, he knew he couldn't turn away. The shockwaves of what happened next would ripple through the school, the community, and his life in ways he could never have imagined. The bell rang, signaling the end of class, and the hallway slowly started to empty as students shuffled to their next periods. Devin stood frozen, still processing what he had just witnessed between Jamal and Corey. His mind raced, wondering what would happen next, but there was no immediate answer. People had already begun to disperse, moving on with their day as if nothing had changed. But for Devin, it felt like everything had changed in that one moment. He couldn't stop thinking about the confrontation, about Jamal's calm, defiant stance, and the harsh words from Corey. It wasn't just a fight over seating or status. It was something deeper, something that had been simmering beneath the surface for years, and now it was exposed. And Devin had seen it. He couldn't unsee it. For the rest of the day, Devin couldn't focus. He went through the motions. Math class, lunch, another class. But his thoughts kept drifting back to Jamal. How did someone stay so calm in the face of that kind of aggression? Was Jamal used to it? Had he faced this kind of thing before? Devin realized that he had no idea what it was like to be someone like Jamal in this town. Sure, Elmsford wasn't known for being overtly racist, but Devin couldn't ignore the subtle undertones of prejudice that had always been there, like a quiet hum in the background. It was something he had never paid much attention to before. After all, he had grown up here, and it never affected him. But now, watching Jamal stand tall against Corey and Brad, Devin felt a pang of guilt. Was this something that needed to be challenged? Something that should have been challenged all along? The next morning, Devin found himself walking to school with an unease that hadn't been there before. He kept thinking about how Jamal had stood his ground, how he had confronted Corey and Brad with a strength that Devin wasn't sure he could ever summon. He was no stranger to standing up for what was right. He had done it before, in smaller, quieter ways. But this felt different. This was bigger. This wasn't a schoolyard at spat. This was an issue that had plagued the community for far longer than anyone cared to admit, and now it had been put right in front of him. As he entered the school grounds, Devin saw Jamal again. This time, Jamal was walking alone, his eyes focused straight ahead, ignoring the whispers that seemed to follow him wherever he went. Devin couldn't just walk by. He had to say something. His feet moved before his mind could fully catch up. He jogged a little to catch up to Jamal, finally walking beside him. "Hey, Jamal, right?" Devin said, trying to sound casual but feeling the weight of the situation in his chest. Jamal glanced at him, his expression unreadable. "Yeah, that's me. Look, I just wanted to say, that was some serious stuff back there, with Corey and Brad." Devin hesitated, unsure of how to continue, but the words came out anyway. I don't know if I would have had the guts to stand up to them like you did. Jamal shrugged, his shoulders tense. It's not about guts. It's about surviving. People like them don't see you as human, just something to put down. So you either fight back or you get trampled. Devin felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't expected Jamal to open up so easily, but the words stung more than he had anticipated. Yeah, but it's not right. People shouldn't have to deal with that. It's not okay. The words felt weak as soon as they left his mouth, but they were honest. Jamal slowed his pace, and for a moment, he didn't say anything. They'd walked in silence for a few steps before he spoke again, this time quieter. It's never okay. But it happens every day, man. Not just here, everywhere. The weight of Jamal's words hit Devin harder than he was ready for. He had never thought about it like that. Sure, he had heard about racism, had seen it in the news, and learned about it in history class, but he had never been on the receiving end of it. It wasn't something he had to live with every day. And now that he had witnessed it up close, Devin could feel a shift inside him, a responsibility he hadn't expected. He wanted to do something. But what? What could one person do to stop something so ingrained, so deeply embedded in the town's culture? As they reached the entrance to the school, the two of them paused. Jamal gave Devin a look that was part challenge, part resignation. You want to help? Jamal asked. Then don't stand by when it happens again. Don't let them walk all over you or anyone else. You've got a choice. You can stay out of it and pretend it's not your problem, or you can take a stand. Your choice. Devin stood there, staring at Jamal for a moment, the weight of the decision before him sinking in. He knew what he had to do, but as the bell rang, signaling the start of first period, Devin's resolve faltered for a split second. Was he really ready to stand up against something this big? He wasn't sure. But what he was sure of was that he couldn't turn back. Not after hearing Jamal's words. Not after seeing the injustice in front of him. He walked into the school building, his mind whirling with possibilities. What could he do? What would happen if he did speak up? As Devin sat down in his next class, his eyes kept drifting to the empty desk where Jamal sat, and he realized that this was just the beginning. The calm he had once felt in his town was gone, replaced by a sense of urgency, a sense of needing to act before it was too late. What would it take to expose the lie that had festered here for so long? And was he willing to risk everything to do it? The decision wasn't going to be easy, and Devin knew that. But the road ahead was clear. If the next few days felt like an emotional whirlwind for Devin, he had made up his mind after his conversation with Jamal. He wasn't going to let things slide. It wasn't just about standing up for a new kid. It was about standing up for what was right, for something much larger than the petty, toxic dynamics that had always existed beneath the surface of their town. But deciding to take action was one thing. Actually doing it was another. Devin wasn't sure where to begin, but he knew he had to do something to expose the lie that was buried deep within Elmsford High School. It didn't take long for the opportunity to present itself. During lunch the next day, Devin sat with his usual group of friends, including Marcus, who was always quick to make light of every situation. But today, Marcus seemed distracted. His eyes kept flicking toward the table where Jamal was sitting, and Devin could feel the tension in the air. Marcus had never said anything overtly racist, but Devin could sense he wasn't entirely comfortable with the growing divide between Jamal and the rest of the students. Marcus had always been one to joke about people being too serious when it came to racial issues. But today, something felt different, like Marcus wasn't as indifferent as he used to be. Devin could see Marcus fighting with his own internal conflict, and before long, Marcus spoke up. Man, what's the deal with that kid? Jamal, right? I mean, yeah, I get it. He's new and all. But what's he doing here? This isn't the place for drama. If he doesn't fit in, why stay? Devin's heart pounded in his chest. He had been waiting for a moment like this, but now that it had arrived, he wasn't sure what to say. There was a lump in his throat as he realized that Marcus, his best friend, wasn't seeing it. He wasn't seeing how important this was, how much bigger it was than just fitting in. He was still caught in the mindset that racism was something you just ignored or didn't make a big deal about. Devin took a deep breath and said, "It's not about fitting in, Marcus. It's about him being treated fairly. You saw what happened the other day, right? That wasn't just some petty argument. That was racism. You can't just ignore it and pretend it's not happening." Marcus recoiled as if the words had struck him harder than expected. "Racism? What are you talking about?" "It was just some kids being kids, Devin. They were messing around. Yeah, maybe it went a little far, but it's not that deep. You can't just go around calling everything racist." Devin's frustration boiled over. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You don't get it, Marcus. This isn't about one incident. It's about how people like Jamal are treated every day. Being judged before they even open their mouths. The comments, the stares, the way people talk behind his back. It's a constant. And it's time someone called it out for what it is." A tense silence followed. Devin's words hung in the air, heavier than any lunchroom chatter. He could see the gears turning in Marcus' head, the hesitation, the denial. But then, just as Devin thought the conversation might die there, Marcus dropped his gaze to the table, staring at his half-eaten sandwich. "I don't know, man. It's just hard to see it that way. I mean, I get what you're saying, but it's Jamal. He's different. He doesn't act like us. Maybe that's why people don't know what to do with him." Devin's stomach twisted. He wanted to lash out, to tell Marcus that being different wasn't the issue at all. But instead, he paused, his mind racing. He had to think bigger. He had to do more than just confront his friends. He had to confront the entire town, the entire system that perpetuated this silent prejudice. It wasn't just about the school anymore. It was about how deep the lie had sunk into the fabric of the community. And that lie needed to be exposed. That's when Devin realized it wasn't just about words. It wasn't enough to talk. He had to act. The next day, Devin found himself standing outside the principal's office. He didn't know exactly why he was there. Was it to confront the school system? Was it to report the harassment Jamal was enduring? Was it to finally challenge the hidden bigotry that had been quietly simmering at the school for years? He wasn't sure. But as he stood there, the gravity of his decision began to settle in. Once he took this step, there was no going back. He would be seen as the kid who spoke up, the kid who stirred the pot, the one who dared to challenge the status quo. Taking a deep breath, Devin walked inside. The principal, Mrs. Wallace, a stern woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for handling disciplinary issues with no-nonsense efficiency, looked up as he entered. "Devin, what can I do for you?" she asked, her voice professional, but with an edge that made her seem both approachable and intimidating. Devin swallowed, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. I need to talk to you about something. Something serious." She gestured for him to sit, her expression softening. "Go on." "I want to report something," Devin started, feeling his heart race. "There's been some bullying, some racism, and it's been going on for a while. I don't think it's being handled right. People like Jamal are being targeted, and it needs to stop." Mrs. Wallace raised an eyebrow, her pen pausing midair. "You're referring to Jamal Thompson, right? I've heard some rumors about him being difficult to integrate, but no one's brought anything official to my attention." Devin felt a surge of frustration. It's not about him being difficult to integrate. It's about the way he's being treated. It's about the comments people are making. I'm not the only one who's seen it, but I'm the only one who's saying something about it. For the first time since he entered the room, Mrs. Wallace's expression shifted. She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. "I understand, Devin, but you're talking about something that's bigger than one student. If you want to make a change, you need to show that it's not just about Jamal. It's about how people like him are treated all the time, in this school and in this town." Devin's mind raced. She was right. He wasn't just fighting for Jamal anymore. He was fighting for anyone who had ever been mistreated because of the color of their skin, for anyone who had been made to feel less than human. And he realized that this fight wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't just going to be about speaking out. It was going to be about forcing people to confront uncomfortable truths. But that was the only way things could change. Devin felt a surge of determination flood through him. This wasn't just a school problem. It was a town problem. And he was going to bring the truth to light, no matter what it cost him. The next few days were a blur of conversations, meetings, and building alliances. Devin knew he couldn't fight this alone. He needed support, not just from Jamal, but from the people who had seen what was happening and hadn't said anything. He couldn't fight the lie by himself. He needed to make sure others saw it too, that they felt it too. It was time for the truth to come out. And there would be no going back. He was going to change anything in this town. It would start with him, and with Jamal's bold move to stand up for what was right. And he wasn't going to stand by while that fight was lost. Not now. Not anymore. The days that followed felt like a series of emotional highs and lows for Devin. He had spoken up, taken that first step, and now there was no turning back. What had started as a personal frustration had transformed into a full-blown battle against something much larger than he had initially realized. As the news spread, rumors, whispers, and murmurs of Devin's meeting with the principal, there were those who rallied behind him, and those who, understandably, wanted to keep their heads down and stay out of it. But the lines had been drawn, and what happened next would change everything. The immediate fallout was almost instantaneous. It started with whispers in the hallways. At first, they were quiet, but soon the gossip had spread throughout the school like wildfire. Devin could hear it in the crowded cafeteria as he walked by. "Did you hear Devin went to the principal about Jamal?" Some kids were genuinely surprised, others skeptical, and a few were downright hostile. It was like someone had thrown a match into a powder keg, and the reaction was as unpredictable as it was explosive. His friends, the ones who had once been by his side through everything, began to distance themselves. It wasn't that they outright turned against him, but there was a noticeable shift in the way they treated him. Marcus, the one person Devin thought he could count on to understand, was distant now. Their conversations had become strained, and Devin could see the discomfort in Marcus's eyes whenever he brought up the subject of Jamal. It wasn't just the students. Teachers and faculty were divided too. Mrs. Wallace, the principal, who had initially seemed supportive, now acted like Devin had stirred something that was better left buried. The way she looked at him when he passed her in the hall made him feel like an outsider, like a troublemaker. She had to walk a fine line, of course, between supporting her students and keeping the peace, but Devin could tell her support was waning. Some of the teachers were sympathetic, like Mr. Jacobs in English, who often gave Devin nods of encouragement as he passed him in the hallway. But others, especially the more conservative staff members, were quick to dismiss the issue, subtly downplaying the significance of what Devin was trying to accomplish. The tension reached a boiling point one Friday afternoon when the school held an assembly in the gymnasium. It was supposed to be a routine event, an announcement of upcoming activities and student achievements, but it quickly turned into something else entirely. Devin wasn't expecting it. In fact, he didn't even know what was happening until he walked into the gym and saw the look of disbelief on Jamal's face. Jamal was sitting on one side of the gym, his eyes fixed on the stage, while a small group of students gathered around him, murmuring in low voices. There was something different about the way people were looking at him now. Something darker. Devin took a seat next to Marcus, who had arrived early, and nudged him. "What's going on? Why's everyone acting weird?" Marcus glanced at the stage, where the principal had just taken the podium. "They're bringing it up," he said quietly. "The whole Jamal thing. They're gonna talk about it, try to clear the air." Devin felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He wasn't prepared for this. Not in front of everyone. Not like this. He had hoped that the conversation would be private, that the issue would be dealt with quietly behind closed doors. But now, as Mrs. Wallace began speaking, it was clear that the situation had escalated far beyond anything he had anticipated. "Students," Mrs. Wallace began, her voice echoing through the gym. "We've recently been made aware of some concerns regarding the treatment of new students, specifically Jamal Thompson. We understand there have been allegations of discrimination and harassment. These are serious matters, and we take them seriously. However, we must also remember the importance of fairness and respect for all individuals." Devin could feel the eyes of the entire gym on him, even though he was sitting in the back. It was as if the entire room had turned into a spotlight, and his every movement, every breath, was being scrutinized. He tried to keep his expression neutral, but his heart was racing. Jamal was sitting a few rows ahead, and he could see the anger in his eyes, a fire that was barely contained beneath the surface. Devin knew the confrontation was coming, but he didn't expect it to come so quickly. Mrs. Wallace continued, "While we are committed to ensuring every student feels welcome and safe, we must also be cautious of turning minor disagreements into something they're not. We will be conducting a full investigation into these claims, but we ask that everyone remain calm and not jump to conclusions." At that moment, Devin couldn't take it anymore. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the gym floor, drawing the attention of everyone around him. He could feel every set of eyes turned toward him. It was as if time had slowed down, and all the emotions he had been bottling up surged to the surface. "This isn't about minor disagreements," Devin shouted, his voice cracking with frustration. "This is about something much bigger. Jamal isn't just some new kid who's causing drama. He's been targeted because of who he is. And you're acting like it's no big deal." A hush fell over the gym. Mrs. Wallace froze, clearly caught off guard by Devin's outburst. There was a murmur of surprise from the students, but Devin couldn't stop now. He couldn't let the opportunity slip through his fingers. "I've seen it. I've heard it. People making comments, treating Jamal like he's less than. And you're just going to sweep it under the rug like it's not happening." For a moment, the gym was silent. Then, a few students began to clap. Soft at first, but then louder, more insistent. Devin's heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't sure if they were clapping for him or against him, but the gesture gave him the courage to continue. "This isn't just about Jamal," he said, his voice steadier now. "This is about all of us. This town, this school. We need to stop pretending like these things don't happen. We can't just sit back and ignore it. Not anymore." A wave of applause erupted from a section of the gym, but not everyone was supportive. Devin could see the glares from some students, the whispers starting again. Jamal stood up slowly from his seat, his eyes locked on Devin's. The two of them exchanged a brief look, a moment of silent understanding. Jamal knew what Devin had just done, and Devin knew what it would cost him. As the assembly came to a close, Devin's heart was still racing. He had made his stand, but now the real consequences would begin. The whispers would grow louder, the tensions would rise. He wasn't just the kid who spoke out against a bully anymore. He was the kid who had challenged an entire system, an entire community. And the fallout would be far-reaching. After the assembly, Devin found himself avoiding eye contact with everyone. It wasn't because he was ashamed, but because he knew that things would never be the same. His classmates looked at him with a mix of admiration, confusion, and disdain. He had done what he thought was right, but he also knew that making a stand like this came with a price. The hardest part, though, was knowing that this was only the beginning. The real work was still ahead. Devin had exposed the cracks in the system, but now he would have to fight to keep them from being ignored. The town, the school, and even his friends were all at a crossroads. Would they choose to change, or would they close their eyes and pretend the problem didn't exist? Devin knew the answer wasn't simple, but he was ready for the fight. He had started something that couldn't be undone, and he wouldn't back down. Not now, not ever. The aftermath of the assembly hit Devin harder than he expected. his outburst in front of the entire school that caused a ripple effect, and now the waters were turbulent. The tension that had already been building between students, teachers, and faculty seemed to reach a fever pitch. As the days passed, Devon's life felt like it was divided into two distinct realities. One was the world he had always known, where he went to class, saw his friends, and lived a life that felt routine, predictable. The other was a new world, a world where he was no longer just another student, but the catalyst for something far more complex. There was no returning to normal. The repercussions of what he had done were unfolding, and it was clear that the effects would not be confined to the school. They were bleeding into the very fabric of the town itself. In the weeks that followed, Devon faced growing resistance from many of his peers. The support he had felt from some students in the gym had quickly faded into uneasy silence. He overheard jokes about him in the hallway, comments about how holier-than-thou he was or how he was just trying to be the hero. And then there were the whispers. The whispered conversations between teachers and staff, conversations Devon couldn't fully hear but could certainly feel. They looked at him differently now, some with admiration, others with disdain. He wasn't just another student trying to make it to graduation anymore. He was the kid who had rocked the boat, the one who had dared to shine a light on the ugliness hiding beneath the surface of their town. But it wasn't just the students and faculty who were reacting to Devon's decision. The town itself was shifting in ways Devon hadn't anticipated. Word of what had happened in the school assembly spread like wildfire beyond the walls of Elmsford High. It was discussed over coffee at local diners, passed around in gossip between neighbors, and even made its way into local news outlets. Articles, albeit small ones, began popping up in the town newspaper, framing the issue as a matter of student behavior or youthful misjudgments. But they couldn't avoid the broader implications of the story. Devon had made people uncomfortable, and the town didn't know how to process it. The first real wake-up call came when Devon's mom, Angela, sat him down one evening after dinner. She looked at him with a kind of sadness in her eyes, as though she could see the weight he was carrying. "Devon," she said gently, "I know you're doing what you believe is right, but you need to understand that not everyone sees it the way you do." She paused, as if searching for the right words. "Your dad and we've both lived here for a long time. And while we've seen progress, we've also seen the quiet, subtle resistance. It's always been there. And it's going to come for you now. You need to be ready for that." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. Devon had always known his parents had faced their own battles with racism, but hearing her speak so plainly about what he had gotten himself into made him realize just how much more was at stake. His mother wasn't just worried about the social fallout at school. She was worried about how this fight could affect their family. Devon had always assumed that standing up for what was right would be a simple matter of right versus wrong. But his mother's warning reminded him that change wasn't just hard. It was dangerous. Despite the pushback, Devon refused to back down. He began to see Jamal more often, the two of them finding brief moments between classes to talk. Jamal had remained quiet in the aftermath of the assembly, retreating into a space where his presence was felt, but his voice was barely heard. Yet there was a strength to him now, something in his eyes that wasn't there before. He knew the stakes too. He knew the cost of standing up for himself and for what was right. "You're not alone in this, you know," Jamal said one afternoon as the two of them sat on the bleachers after school, staring out over the empty field. "I appreciate you standing up for me, for all of us. But you're not doing this just for me. You're doing it for everyone who's ever been pushed to the side, for everyone who's been made to feel like they don't belong here." Devon nodded, but the weight of his decision felt heavier than ever. Jamal's words were a reminder of the responsibility that now rested on his shoulders. This wasn't just about a school or a town anymore. This was about confronting an entire system of inequality that stretched far beyond their small town of Elmsford. It was about the larger social forces that worked in tandem to keep people of color marginalized and invisible. And Devon was realizing, with increasing clarity, that this fight wasn't just about one lie that had been exposed. It was about fighting a much larger truth that had been suppressed for far too long. But the response from the town continued to get more complicated. Devin had hoped that people would begin to come around, that his outspokenness would spark a genuine conversation. But instead, he found himself being publicly challenged. At a town hall meeting one evening, a heated debate broke out. The issue of racism in Elmsford had become the talk of the town, and a segment of the population, mostly older residents, sought to defend the traditional values they believed the town had upheld for decades. It was at that meeting that Devin realized just how deeply embedded these biases were. They weren't just limited to students or teachers. They were interwoven into the town's very fabric. "What happened to good old-fashioned values?" one of the older residents asked, her voice shrill and defensive. "We're being told we're racist because we don't cater to every new idea or every new person that moves in here." This town was built on hard work, family, and community. And now we're supposed to change everything just because a couple of kids decided to stir the pot. The room buzzed with murmurs of agreement. Devin sat in the back of the room, his heart pounding. He had known it would be difficult, but hearing these words aloud was different. The fight wasn't just about educating people anymore. It was about dismantling a worldview that had been entrenched for generations. People were afraid, and when people are afraid, they become defensive. Devin stood up before he could second-guess himself. His voice was firm but trembling. "It's not about changing everything. It's about seeing things for what they are. This isn't just about Jamal. It's about all of us. It's about making sure that everyone, no matter where they come from, feels like they belong here." This town wasn't built on excluding people. It was built on opportunity for everyone, no matter who they are. The room grew quiet. Some people were nodding, others were glaring, and some simply looked away. The divide was clear now, undeniable. This fight wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be won quickly. But Devin wasn't backing down. Not now. As the meeting came to an end, Devin's mind raced. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know how the town would respond, or how much further this would go. But one thing was clear. He had opened a door, and there was no way to close it again. The fight had only just begun. But Devin knew that even though the road ahead would be long and filled with obstacles, he had no intention of giving up. Not now, and not ever. The days after the town hall were a whirlwind. Devin's life had become a constant balancing act, trying to navigate between the everyday chaos of high school and the increasingly complex battle he had unwittingly sparked. The town's reaction had been mixed. There were still those who admired his courage, those who stood with him, and then there were those who couldn't hide their hostility, either through dismissive comments or outright resistance. But Devin had long since stopped caring about how uncomfortable the situation made people. What mattered now was the truth, and that truth was undeniable. Every day, it seemed, another layer of the town's prejudice peeled back, revealing how deeply rooted it was in the very structures of their community. And Devin was determined to do whatever it took to keep exposing that truth, no matter the cost. The hardest part was watching the effect this had on Jamal. For weeks, Jamal had become a kind of symbol, both for those who supported him and for those who didn't. He had been thrust into the limelight, something he never asked for, and the pressure was starting to weigh on him. Jamal, who had once carried himself with quiet confidence, now seemed more withdrawn, more guarded. Devin had been reaching out to him, offering support and solidarity, but it felt like no matter how much he tried, he couldn't shield Jamal from the weight of the judgment that seemed to follow him everywhere. One afternoon after school, Devin found Jamal sitting on the steps outside the school, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his eyes staring off into the distance. Devin sat beside him, their shoulders almost touching, but neither spoke at first. The silence between them was thick, like an invisible wall that neither of them could break through. Finally, Jamal spoke, his voice low but heavy with emotion. "I didn't ask for this, man. I didn't ask to be the face of whatever this is. I just wanted to fit in, you know. I just wanted to be left alone." Devin's heart ached. He understood what Jamal was saying, even though he couldn't fully relate. Jamal hadn't chosen to be the catalyst for change. He had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, a target for the same prejudices that had existed in the town long before either of them had been born. But Devin had made his choice, and there was no turning back. "I know, man. I didn't think it would get this big either. But sometimes, it's not about what we want. It's about doing what's right, even when it sucks. We're fighting for something bigger than ourselves now." Jamal looked at him, his expression unreadable, and for a moment, Devin wondered if he was saying the right thing. But then Jamal gave a small, tired smile, the kind that came from someone who had fought too many battles and was simply too exhausted to keep up the facade of indifference. "You're right. I get it. I don't know if I'm strong enough for all of this, but you're right. This isn't just about me anymore." It was then that Devin realized how truly hard it was to keep fighting for what was right. The weight wasn't just on him or Jamal. It was on every single person who had to carry the burden of being different, of standing out, of daring to demand equality in a world that wasn't ready to give it. It was one thing to speak out, but it was another to be the one who bore the consequences. In the weeks that followed, the town continued to fracture. The once tight community that had rallied around sports games, town fairs, and school fundraisers began to divide itself. Those who supported the change, who had quietly agreed with Devin's call for a fairer, more inclusive town, became more vocal, attending town meetings, speaking out in local newspapers, and organizing events to promote diversity and understanding. But those who were resistant to change, who felt threatened by the disruption Devin had caused, grew more entrenched in their views. They formed groups, distributed flyers with veiled criticisms of the new direction the town was taking, and sought to reclaim the narrative of the town's identity. The local government, pressured by the growing tension, began to take small, symbolic actions. They organized diversity workshops at the school and hosted community forums to discuss racism and inclusion. But Devin could see through the superficiality of these gestures. They were meant to placate the loudest voices and pretend that everything was being handled. They weren't real solutions. Not yet. And then, just as Devin began to think that maybe the fight would never be truly won, something unexpected happened. At a community rally organized by those in support of the changes Devin had sparked, Jamal took the stage. Devin hadn't expected it. For weeks, Jamal had been reluctant to speak publicly, afraid of the backlash. But here he was, standing in front of hundreds of people, his hands shaking slightly but his eyes clear. As he began to speak, Devin's heart swelled with pride. "I never thought I'd be standing here like this," Jamal began, his voice steady despite the crowd's energy. "But I'm tired of being silent. I'm tired of people pretending that everything is fine when it's not. We're not the problem. The problem is the lies we've been told, the way things have always been. The problem is pretending like racism is a thing of the past when it's right in front of our faces every day. I'm here because I believe we can change. I believe this town can be better than it is, better than it has been." The crowd was silent at first, but then, slowly, a few people began to clap. Then, more joined in, and soon the entire crowd erupted in applause. Jamal, standing at the front, looked out over the crowd, his face filled with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. Devin watched him, feeling a lump form in his throat. It was happening. The change they had fought for was beginning to take root. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was happening. Over the next few months, the ripple effect of Devin and Jamal's efforts began to spread beyond their school, and even beyond their town. The town of Elmsford, once a place where silence and complacency ruled, had become a symbol of the possibility of change. People from other towns reached out, asking how they could bring similar conversations to their own communities, and even though Devin knew that the fight was far from over, that there was still so much to be done, he felt a sense of fulfillment that was hard to describe. Devin had changed. He had been forced to grow in ways he never expected. The world around him had changed, too. His friends, his family, even the town he had called home. But the biggest transformation, he realized, was within himself. He had gone from being a teenager concerned only with getting through high school to being a leader who had helped spark a movement that would change the course of his town's history. It wasn't just about standing up to a racist lie anymore. It was about speaking the truth, no matter how hard it was to hear. And the truth, Devin now knew, was the only weapon powerful enough to fight back against the lies that had shaped their lives for so long. As he looked at Jamal, standing beside him on that stage, Devin knew they had only just begun. The path ahead would be long, the struggles would continue, but they had taken the first step, and there was no going back. The fight for justice, equality, and truth was far from over. But together, they had proven that change was possible. And that, Devin realized, was the most powerful lesson of all.